I loved my straight best friend for 20 years, then she, me at the pool. I was 17 when I first realized I was in love with Maya, standing in her childhood bedroom while she tried on her prom dress, spinning around with that radiant smile that could light up the darkest corners of my heart. She asked me if she looked beautiful, and I told her she looked perfect. Swallowing down the words, I really wanted to say that she was the most breathtaking thing I'd ever seen, that watching her get ready for a date with some boy was slowly tearing me apart from the inside, that I would have given anything to be the one taking her to prom instead. But I didn't say any of that. I just smiled and helped her zip up the back of her dress, my fingers trembling against the fabric, and told myself for the first time what would become my most practiced lie, that being her best friend was enough. 20 years is a long time to love someone in silence. 20 years of birthday cakes and late-night phone calls, of being her shoulder to cry on through 3 different breakups, of attending her engagement party and forcing my face into a smile that felt like it might crack my skull in half. 20 years of watching her date men who didn't deserve her, who didn't see the way her nose crinkled when she laughed at her own jokes, who didn't know that she cried during sad commercials and collected vintage teacups and sang off-key in the shower. 20 years of being the best friend, the confidant, the constant presence in her life while pretending that my heart didn't shatter a little bit more every time. She called me her platonic soulmate. I had become an expert at compartmentalizing my feelings, at shoving them down into some locked chamber of my heart where they couldn't interfere with our friendship. I dated other women, had relationships that lasted months or sometimes years, but none of them ever quite fit right because I was always comparing them to her. My therapist once told me that I needed to either tell Maya how I felt or create distance between us, that this half-life I was living wasn't sustainable. I fired that therapist the next week. The thought of losing Maya's friendship was more terrifying than the thought of loving her forever from the sidelines. So I kept quiet, and the years accumulated like layers of sediment, burying my truth deeper and deeper until I almost convinced myself it didn't exist. Her engagement fell apart spectacularly when she was 35. She showed up at my apartment at 2 a.m, mascara running down her cheeks, still wearing the dress she'd worn to what was supposed to be a romantic dinner. She'd caught her fiancé texting another woman, someone he'd been seeing for months, and the wedding that was 3 weeks away was suddenly canceled. I held her while she sobbed, stroked her hair, made her tea, and listened to her process the betrayal out loud. Part of me, the selfish, desperate part that I hated, felt a sick sort of relief that the wedding wasn't happening, that I wouldn't have to stand there as her maid of honor and watch her marry someone else. But mostly I just hurt for her, wanted to track down her ex-fiancé and make him understand what he'd lost, wanted to take away her pain and carry it myself. She stayed with me for 3 weeks after that, sleeping in my guest room, slowly putting herself back together. We fell into old rhythms from our college days, making breakfast together, watching movies until 3 a.m, talking about everything and nothing. I caught her looking at me sometimes with this expression I couldn't quite read, something that seemed almost like she was seeing me for the first time. But I dismissed it as wishful thinking, as my imagination playing tricks on me because I wanted so badly for something to be different between us. The pool party wasn't even supposed to happen. It was Maya's idea, a spontaneous gathering she organized 6 months after her broken engagement, declaring that she needed to celebrate being single and free and done with terrible men. She invited a dozen friends to her apartment complex's pool on a sweltering July afternoon, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and turns the pavement into a griddle. I almost didn't go because I knew Maya would be wearing a swimsuit, and I'd already spent 2 decades trying not to stare at her, trying not to let my eyes linger too long on the curve of her collarbone or the way her hair fell across her shoulders. But she'd practically begged me to come, said the party wouldn't be the same without me, and I'd never been able to say no to her about anything. When I arrived at the pool, Maya was already in the water, laughing with some of our mutual friends, her wet hair slicked back from her face. She saw me and waved, called my name, and something in her voice made my stomach flip. I set down my bag and slipped into the pool, the cool water a relief against my sun-warmed skin. The afternoon unfolded in lazy, pleasant conversation, people drifting in and out of the pool, music playing from someone's portable speaker. I tried to focus on talking to other friends, on being normal, on not watching Maya's every movement like I was a planet caught in her gravitational pull. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, most of the guests started leaving. Soon it was just Maya and me floating in the pool as the water turned golden in the fading light. We drifted toward the shallow end, and she turned to face me, treading water, her expression suddenly serious in a way that made my heart rate accelerate. She said my name softly, and there was something in her voice that I'd never heard before. Something vulnerable and uncertain and almost frightened. What she said next would replay in my mind 1,000 times in the weeks that followed. She told me that her therapist had asked her a question during their last session. Who was the person she thought about most? The person she wanted to share good news with? The person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's? She said she'd answered immediately, without thinking, that it was me. It had always been me. And her therapist had asked why she'd never dated me, why she'd spent her entire adult life looking for love in men who never quite measured up when she had someone right beside her who already knew her better than anyone. My brain struggled to process what she was saying. I stood frozen in waist-deep water. The sounds of the summer evening, crickets beginning their chorus, someone's distant laughter, the lap of water against the pool's edge, all fading into white noise. Maya moved closer to me, close enough that I could see water droplets on her eyelashes, could count the freckles that the summer sun had brought out across her nose. She said she'd been thinking about us differently for months, seeing our history through a new lens, realizing that what she'd felt for me all these years was something she'd been too scared to name. She told me about noticing the way her heart jumped when I texted, about how she compared every date to the easy comfort of being with me, about how she'd lie awake at night, replaying our conversations, and wondering what I was doing, who I was with. She said she'd convinced herself for so long that she was straight, that what we had was just friendship, but that the lie had been getting harder and harder to maintain. And then she asked me the question I'd dreamed about and feared in equal measure for 20 years. She asked if I'd ever thought about us as more than friends, if I'd ever wondered what it would be like if we crossed that line. The words stuck in my throat. 20 years of practiced silence fighting against the truth that wanted to pour out. I could have lied again, could have protected myself, could have told her I loved her as a friend and nothing more. It would have been the safe choice, the one that guaranteed I'd keep her in my life exactly as she'd always been. But I was so tired of lying, so exhausted from carrying this secret like a stone in my chest, and standing there in that pool with the sunset painting, everything in shades of gold and rose. I finally let myself tell the truth. I told her everything, about being 17 and realizing I was in love with her while helping her get ready for prom, about every relationship I'd sabotaged because no one could be her, about attending her engagement party and drinking too much wine afterward and crying in my car, about the thousands of times I'd bitten back the words I love you in a way that meant so much more than friendship, about how loving her had been the defining undercurrent of my entire adult life, this constant ache that I'd learned to live with the way you learn to live with chronic pain. My voice cracked and broke as I spoke, and tears mixed with the pool water on my face, and I couldn't tell anymore which was which. When I finished, Maya was crying too, and she reached out and took my hands under the water, her fingers lacing through mine. She said she was sorry, that she was so desperately sorry for all the years I'd suffered in silence, for all the times she'd talked about other people while being oblivious to how it hurt me. She said she wished she'd figured herself out sooner, that she'd wasted so much time looking for something she already had, and then she asked if it was too late, if she'd missed her chance, if 20 years of friendship had created a distance too vast to cross. I want to take a moment here to ask something of you. If this story is touching your heart, if you've ever loved someone in silence, if you've ever been afraid to speak your truth, if you believe in second chances, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories about love in all its forms, about the beautiful messiness of being human. It means more than you know. Standing there in the pool with Maya's hands in mine, I thought about all the ways I could answer her question. I could have told her it was too late. that she'd hurt me too much, that I'd built walls around my heart that were too strong to come down. I could have protected myself from the possibility of more pain, from the risk of losing her friendship if a relationship didn't work. But I'd spent 20 years playing it safe. 20 years choosing fear over hope, and I was done being afraid. I kissed her. Or maybe she kissed me. Honestly, I'm still not sure who moved first because it felt like we both did. Like we'd been moving toward this moment for 2 decades and had finally arrived. Her lips were soft and tasted like chlorine and cherry chapstick, and kissing her was like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. She made this small sound in the back of her throat, part surprise and part relief, and wound her arms around my neck, pulling me closer. We kissed until the automatic pool lights flickered on, until the summer darkness had fully settled around us, until I was dizzy and breathless and more alive than I'd ever felt. That was 6 months ago. 6 months of learning how to be in love with my best friend openly instead of secretly, of discovering that she snores slightly and hogs the blankets and makes terrible coffee but looks beautiful first thing in the morning. 6 months of her meeting my family as my girlfriend instead of just my friend, of holding hands in public, of goodnight kisses and good morning texts and all the small intimacies I'd dreamed about for so long. 6 months of her telling me she loves me and me finally being able to say it back without qualification or fear. It hasn't all been easy. We've had to navigate the weirdness of transitioning from friendship to romance. Had to have difficult conversations about expectations and boundaries and what happens if this doesn't work out. We've had to deal with friends who are surprised or skeptical, family members who don't understand the awkwardness of running into her ex-fiancé at a mutual friend's wedding. Maya has had to work through her own internalized homophobia, had to grieve the heteronormative future she'd always imagined for herself, had to come out to her traditional parents who are still processing the news. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you one more thing. If this touched your heart, if you felt something while reading about our journey, please leave a comment below telling us about a time you had to be brave enough to speak your truth. Your story matters, and I'd love to hear it. But here's what I know now that I didn't know 20 years ago. Loving someone in silence might feel safer, but it's a half-life, a shadow of what's possible when you're brave enough to be vulnerable. Yes, telling Maya the truth was terrifying. Yes, there was a very real possibility that I could have lost her friendship forever. But the alternative, spending the rest of my life wondering what if would have been its own kind of death. A slow erosion of my spirit until there was nothing left but regret and roads not taken. Sometimes the person you've been looking for has been standing beside you all along, waiting for you to be brave enough to see them. Sometimes love isn't a lightning strike but a slow dawning, a gradual realization that what you thought was friendship was actually something infinitely more precious. And sometimes, just sometimes, if you're lucky enough and brave enough and patient enough, your best friend looks at you across a pool at sunset and sees not just who you've always been but who you could become together. 20 years is a long time to wait for your happy ending. But standing in my kitchen this morning, watching Maya sing off-key while making her terrible coffee, stealing kisses between sips and laughing at nothing in particular, I can tell you with absolute certainty that she was worth every single moment of waiting, every heartache, every silent longing, every year of loving her from a distance. It all led us here, to this life we're building together, to mornings that smell like bad coffee and taste like second chances. The pool where everything changed is just a pool now, ordinary and unremarkable. But sometimes when we drive past Maya's old apartment complex, we'll look at each other and smile, remembering the night that 20 years of silence finally gave way to truth, the night that best friends became something infinitely more beautiful. And I'll take her hand, this woman I've loved for most of my life, and I'll think about how the bravest thing I ever did was finally let myself believe that I deserved to be loved back.